It's February 1961, Daytona Beach, Florida. The roar of engines fills the air as NASCAR's biggest teams roll their cars toward the starting grid. Chevrolet is feeling invincible. Their 409 cubic inch V8 has been dominating every oval track in America. Pontiac's got speed, Chrysler's got power. And Ford? Ford's been getting embarrassed. For years, General Motors had owned the performance conversation. The 409 was a legend in the making. Beach Boys were about to write a song about it. Magazine covers featured it. Drag strips feared it. And Ford's old Y-block V8? It was tired, heavy, outdated. Nobody was singing about that. Nobody was putting it on posters. Ford dealers were losing sales. Young buyers wanted muscle, and GM was giving it to them. But what most people didn't know, what GM definitely didn't know, was that Ford had been quietly building something different, something bigger, something that would change the balance of American horsepower for the next decade. They called it the FE, and the 390 cubic inch version of that engine was about to become General Motors' worst nightmare. This is the story of how Ford went from getting humiliated on the racetrack to building one of the most versatile, durable, and brutally effective big block V8s ever made. It's a story about revenge, about engineering under pressure, and about an engine that refused to quit, even when everything around it was falling apart. Most people remember the 427, the side oiler, the Le Mans winner. But long before that engine ever turned a wheel, the 390 FE was doing the dirty work. It was the foundation, the proving ground, and it scared the hell out of Detroit. You think you know this story? Not like this. Let's go back to where it all started. The year is 1958. Ford is in serious trouble. Their existing engine lineup is a mess. The Y-block V8, introduced back in 1954, was revolutionary in its time. It featured overhead valves and a modern short-stroke design. But by the late 50s, it was struggling to keep up. Overheating problems plagued it in traffic. Oiling issues caused premature wear, and the displacement just couldn't grow large enough to compete with what GM and Chrysler were cooking up. The biggest Y-block Ford could build was 312 cubic inches. Meanwhile, Chevrolet was already pushing past 400. The math didn't work. Ford was bringing a knife to a gunfight. Ford's chief engineer at the time reportedly told his team, "We're not just losing races, we're losing customers. Every Saturday night, some kid watches a Chevy win, and Monday morning he walks into a GM dealership." They knew they needed a completely new architecture. Something modern, something scalable, something that could grow from a basic family sedan motor all the way up to a full-blown race engine, without requiring a complete redesign every time they needed more power. So they built the FE. The name stood for Ford Edsel, a nod to the two car lines it would serve. But what mattered wasn't the name, it was the design. The FE used a 90-degree V8 layout with a deep skirt block that extended below the crankshaft centerline. It featured cross-bolted main bearing caps, 4 bolts per cap instead of the standard 2. That might sound like engineering jargon, but here's what it meant. This engine was built to take punishment, the kind of punishment that breaks lesser motors. The original FE displaced 332 cubic inches, then 352. Engineers kept boring it out, kept pushing the limits, and by 1961, Ford punched it out to 390 cubic inches with a 4.05-inch bore and a 3.78-inch stroke. That's when things got interesting. The 390 wasn't just bigger, it was better. Ford offered it in multiple configurations, ranging from a mild 265 horsepower 2-barrel version for family sedans all the way up to 401 horsepower in the high-performance Police Interceptor trim. Same basic block, same fundamental architecture, wildly different personalities. The base model ran a conservative 9.6.1 compression ratio on regular gas. The high-performance version, 10.5.1 compression, requiring premium fuel and delivering a thunderous 427 lb-ft of torque at 3,200 RPM. And here's the thing GM never saw coming. The 390 wasn't just a straight-line weapon, it was adaptable. Ford dropped it into everything. full-size Galaxies, Thunderbirds, station wagons weighing over 4,500 pounds, police cruisers that needed to chase down anything on the highway, and eventually, the car that would define a generation, the Mustang. But before the Mustang made the 390 famous, NASCAR made it feared. In 1963, Ford showed up at Daytona with a secret weapon. Tiny Lund, driving a 427-powered Ford Galaxy, won the Daytona 500 in one of the most dramatic finishes in NASCAR history. Lund wasn't even supposed to drive that day. He took over after Marvin Panch was injured in a testing accident. But it wasn't just the 427 that won that year. The 390, running in support races and short-track events across the country, was proving itself race after race. Reliable, consistent, fast enough to matter, and that reliability drove Chevrolet engineers absolutely crazy. See, the 409 had a problem. It was powerful, up to 425 horsepower in some configurations with dual 4-barrel carburetors. But it had a reputation for braking when pushed hard. Crankshafts failed under sustained load. Connecting rod bearings wore out prematurely. At sustained high RPM, the oiling system struggled to keep up with demand. One Chevrolet mechanic reportedly said, "The 409 was like a sprinter, fast out of the gate, but ask it to run a marathon and it'd collapse before the finish line." The 390? Different story entirely. Ford had designed the FE with an innovative oiling system that fed the main bearings through a central gallery running down the center of the block. At 5,500 RPM, right in the sweet spot for NASCAR's superspeedways, it stayed cool, stayed lubricated, and kept running lap after lap. Oil pressure held steady at 45 psi even after hours of racing. While Chevrolet crews were pulling engines and swapping parts between races, Ford teams were just changing oil, checking the timing, and going again. But there was a problem. Power. Raw power. The 390 could run all day, but by 1963, it was maxed out. Ford's engineers had pushed the bore as far as it would go without compromising the cylinder walls. At 405 inches, they were already within fractions of an inch from the water jackets. Any bigger, and the block would crack under high-temperature operation. They'd tuned the compression to 10.51, running premium fuel, and still risking detonation on hot days at tracks like Riverside and Darlington. At 401 horsepower, the high-performance 390 was competitive, but Chevy's 409 made 425. Chrysler's new 426 Max Wedge made 415, and that was the conservative rating. And rumors were already spreading about something even bigger coming from Mopar, a hemispherical combustion chamber engine with massive valves and airflow numbers that would change the rules entirely. Ford needed more. Much more. And they got it. In 1963, Ford released the 427 FE, a larger, more aggressive version built specifically for racing. It shared the same basic architecture as the 390, but with a 4.23-inch bore and a 3.78-inch stroke, punching displacement up to 427 cubic inches. In full race trim, with dual 4-barrel carburetors and high-rise aluminum intake manifolds, it made over 500 horsepower. Some dyno sheets showed 520 horsepower at 7,000 RPM. But here's what most people don't realize. The 427 never would have existed without the 390. The 390 was the test bed, the development platform, the sacrificial lamb. Every lesson Ford learned about cooling, oiling, durability, and valve train stability came from years of racing and refining the 390. When engineers designed the 427's legendary side oiler block, the one that would go on to win Le Mans, they based it on data they'd gathered from thousands of hours of 390 punishment. They knew exactly where the weak points were. They knew where the oil starved. They knew where the heat concentrated, and they fixed all of it. And while the 427 grabbed all the headlines, the 390 kept doing what it did best, winning everywhere else. In 1966, Ford stuffed the 390 into the brand new Mustang GT. It was a controversial decision. The Mustang had been designed as a compact, sporty car. A secretary's car, some called it. The engine bay was tight. Weight distribution was already nose-heavy with the small block 289. Dropping a 390 cubic inch big block into that cramped engine bay was like putting a jet engine in a rowboat. But Ford did it anyway, because customers demanded it. The 390 Mustang made 320 horsepower at 4,800 RPM and 427 lb-ft of torque at 3,200 RPM in its standard configuration. That torque number was critical. It meant instant throttle response, brutal acceleration from any speed. 0 to 60 came in 6.2 seconds in magazine tests, explosive for a pony car. Quarter-mile times dipped into the mid-14s with trap speeds over 98 mph. Car and driver called it a genuine wolf in sheep's clothing. Motor Trend said it transformed the Mustang from a sporty compact into a legitimate muscle car. It wasn't the fastest thing on the strip. Chevrolet's 396 Chevelle, making 375 horsepower in L78 trim, still had the edge. The 426 Hemi Mopars were in another league entirely, running 13-second quarters right off the showroom floor. But the 390 Mustang offered something those cars couldn't match: accessibility. You could buy one at your local Ford dealer for under $3,500. Insurance was reasonable, nothing like the penalties for a Hemi car. Drive it to work on Monday, take your girlfriend out on Friday, take it to the drag strip on Saturday. And it didn't need constant maintenance to stay alive. That accessibility made the 390 FE one of the best-selling performance engines of the entire decade. Ford moved over 28,390 GT Mustangs in 1967 alone. But the real proving ground wasn't the drag strip. It was endurance racing. In 1966, Ford entered 3 GT40 MKII race cars at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Those cars were powered by the 427 side oiler, but the development path ran straight through the 390. Every lesson about oil starvation under sustained high RPM. Every failure mode that had killed engines in NASCAR. Every reinforcement to the main caps and crank journals, every modification to the cooling passages, all of it came from years of 390 development. The night before the race, Henry Ford II himself walked through the garage. He looked at Chief Engineer Roy Lunn and said, "Win this race, whatever it takes." 24 hours later, Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon crossed the finish line at Le Mans, with Ken Miles and Denny Hume right behind them in second. A third Ford GT40 took third place. Ford's 1-2-3 sweep didn't just defeat Ferrari, it humiliated them. It validated everything the FE program had been building towards since 1958. Those engines had run 3,000 miles at an average speed exceeding 125 mph. Oil temperatures stayed stable. Bearings showed minimal wear. When mechanics tore down the winning engine after the race, they found parts that looked almost new. And General Motors? They watched it happen from across the Atlantic. GM never entered Le Mans. They'd quietly pulled out of factory racing in 1963 under a corporate anti-racing policy, the so-called racing ban. But everyone in Detroit knew what that sweep meant. Ford had just proven in the most brutal endurance test in all of motorsport that their engine architecture was the most reliable in the world. The 390 might not have been the engine that won Le Mans, but it was the engine that made that victory possible. By 1968, the muscle car wars were reaching their absolute peak. Ford, GM, and Chrysler were locked in an all-out horsepower battle. Engines kept getting bigger. Compression ratios kept climbing toward 11:1, even 12:1. Power numbers that would have seemed insane in 1960 were now standard. And the 390 FE was starting to show its age. Ford knew it. The 390's bore was maxed out at 4.05 inches. No room for growth without a complete block redesign. Emissions regulations were tightening as California led the charge against smog. Insurance companies were starting to punish high-performance vehicles with massive premiums. A 390 Mustang that cost $200 extra to insure in 1966 suddenly cost $800 extra by 1969. Young buyers couldn't afford the coverage. So Ford did what it had to do. They retired the 390 as a performance option. In 1969, the 390 GT was replaced by the 428 Cobra Jet, a bigger, more powerful engine designed to meet the horsepower demands of the late muscle car era. The Cobra Jet made 335 horsepower on paper, but everyone knew it was underrated for insurance purposes. Real output was closer to 400. The 390 continued in lower performance roles, powering trucks, police cars, fleet vehicles, and full-size sedans until 1976. Over its entire production run, Ford built more than 4 million FE engines in various displacements. But here's the thing about the 390, it never really went away. For decades after production ended, enthusiasts kept building them. Hot rodders discovered what Ford engineers had known all along. This engine could take incredible punishment and keep asking for more. The aftermarket exploded with performance parts. Aluminum heads from Edelbrock and Ford Motorsport, roller camshafts with aggressive lift profiles, stroker kits that pushed displacement past 430 cubic inches. A well-built 390 could make over 500 horsepower without exotic fuel or forged internals. Some builders pushed past 600 with forced induction, and collectors noticed. Today, a numbers-matching 1967 Mustang GT with the 390 S-Code engine sells for over $80,000 in good condition. Frame-off restorations with documentation have crossed $150,000 at auction. Rare GT500 models with 390-based 428 engines fetch over $200,000. That's more than many 427 Cobras cost when they were brand new. Why? Because the 390 represents something special. It wasn't the most powerful, it wasn't the most exotic, but it was the engine that proved Ford could compete with GM on every battlefield: the street, the strip, the showroom, and the racetrack. Before the 390, Ford was an afterthought in the performance world. After the 390, they were a dynasty. General Motors never forgot that lesson. When they designed the LS engine architecture in the 1990s, the engine that would dominate the next generation of American performance, they studied Ford's FE program obsessively. They looked at the oiling system, the deep skirt block design, the modular philosophy that allowed one architecture to serve dozens of applications, the scalability that let engineers grow displacement without starting from scratch. In many ways, the LS was GM's answer to a question Ford asked in 1958. How do you build one engine that can do everything? The 390 FE wasn't perfect. It was heavy, over 600 pounds fully dressed with accessories. The cast-iron exhaust manifolds were restrictive, strangling horsepower. The stock heads left airflow on the table compared to later designs. But it was relentless, durable, and when it mattered most, it showed up ready to fight. That's why Ford's 390 FE became GM's worst rival, not because it was the fastest, not because it had the biggest numbers, but because it was the engine that proved Ford would never stop fighting. So the next time someone tells you the muscle car wars were won by horsepower alone, remember this: the engine that scared General Motors the most wasn't the one with the biggest numbers. It was the one that kept running when everything else broke. If you want to see more stories like this, forgotten rivalries, legendary engines, and the engineering battles that shaped American performance, drop a comment and let me know what to cover next. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. There's a lot more history to uncover.